She put the envelope back on the table and pushed it toward him gently, with one finger, the way you return something precious to someone who doesn't yet know its full value. The room was loud. 26 six-year-olds were transitioning from afternoon activity to dismissal, chairs scraping, bags zipping, names being called from the doorway. And through all of it, she stayed completely still. Her hands were folded on the table. Her eyes were on the boy in front of her, not the chaos, not the noise. Him. He had placed the envelope there like it was a contract, like he had rehearsed this, and looking at his face, the careful arrangement of his expression, the set of his small jaw, the way he was holding his breath without realizing it. She understood that he had. "I saved it," he said. "It's a lot." She opened the envelope, counted what was inside without moving her lips, set it down, looked at him for a long moment. This small, serious boy in a too-pressed uniform, who smelled faintly of cedarwood, which meant his father's house smelled of cedarwood, which meant no one had thought to buy him something that smelled like a child. "Jae-min," she said quietly. "Yes? Where did you get these marbles?" He blinked. "I found one. I traded the other one for a dinosaur sticker, and then I traded the sticker back because I changed my mind." He paused. "They're worth a lot more than they look." She almost smiled. Almost. Because the marbles were worth nothing, and the boy across from her was worth everything. And he had put both in an envelope and called it a salary. And something in her chest had shifted, very quietly, in a direction she hadn't planned for. "Jae-min," she said again. "You can't pay someone to be your mum." He considered this the way he considered everything. Seriously, with his whole face. Then, "How do people get moms then?" She didn't answer right away. That was the kind of question that deserved the silence before it. If you're new here, please like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe, because this story is going to stay with you long after it ends. Her name was Amara Diallo, and she had come to Seoul the way people come to cities that are not their own, with a plan and a wound she hadn't quite named yet. The plan was professional. A 2-year contract with Hanguk International Primary School, teaching early childhood education to the children of diplomats and executives, and, occasionally, men whose money had no traceable origin. She had a master's degree from the University of Edinburgh, 7 years of classroom experience, and a letter of recommendation from her former head teacher that used the word extraordinary twice and exceptional once. She had packed for Seoul the way you pack for a chapter, not a visit. With intention, with the understanding that she was building something here, even if she wasn't sure yet what it was. The wound was personal. An engagement in Accra that had ended 14 months ago in a quiet, devastating conversation in a restaurant she could no longer think about. A man she had loved honestly and completely, who had loved her back with conditions she'd only discovered at the end. She had come to Seoul because staying in Ghana meant running into that man at someone's wedding every 3 months. And she was tired of being graceful about it. Seoul had been many things, overwhelming and magnificent and cold, in ways that were not all about the weather. But it had also been, unexpectedly, the classroom. It had given her Jae-min. She'd noticed him on his first day, 3 months ago. He had arrived alone, which was unusual, since first-day students were almost always delivered by a parent who lingered and photographed and cried a little, accompanied only by a man in a dark suit who was very clearly not his father and very clearly armed, though nothing about him was visible. The man had handed over an enrollment packet, nodded once, and left. Jae-min had stood at the door of the classroom in his pressed uniform, looked at the 26 other children with the calm assessment of someone taking inventory, and then walked directly to the art corner and sat down. He'd picked up a crayon brown and drawn a house. Amara had watched him draw for 3 minutes before going over. The house had 4 walls and a roof and a door and 2 windows and absolutely nothing else. No garden, no path, no trees, no figures standing in the doorway. "Who lives there?" she'd asked, crouching beside him. He'd considered the drawing. "My dad and me. Do you want to add yourselves in?" He'd looked at the house for a long moment. Then he'd picked up a black crayon and added 2 small figures, one tall, one very small, both standing inside the house, not beside each other, but in separate windows. She had thought about that drawing for 2 days. Kim Jae-min was, by any measurable standard, fine. He ate, he participated. He completed his work with a precision that was slightly alarming in a 6-year-old. He did not cry. He did not cling. He played with the other children in a way that was friendly but calibrated. He knew all their names, remembered what they'd said the day before, asked follow-up questions. He was in many ways the easiest child in the room. He was also the loneliest child in the room. Amara had been teaching for 7 years. She knew the difference. The file told her what the child's face confirmed under emergency contact. It listed Kim Dae-won, father, and then, on the next line, Mr. Shin, Jae, household security. Under mother, not listed. Under any other guardian, relative, or family friend, nothing. She had pulled that file 3 times in 3 months, not because she needed to, because she kept hoping something had changed. It hadn't. The parent assembly happened on a Thursday evening in mid-October, and it was the first time she saw him. She had heard the shift before she saw it, the particular quality of silence that moves through a room when someone enters who changes the air. Conversations didn't stop. They just adjusted, became slightly more careful. Parents who had been leaning comfortably against walls straightened. The school director, a meticulous woman named Mrs. Park, who intimidated everyone equally, suddenly found something very interesting to study on her clipboard. Kim Dae-won came in 12 minutes late and made no apology for it. He was tall, taller than she'd expected, though she wasn't sure what she'd expected. And he wore a charcoal suit that had not come off a rack, moving with the particular economy of a man who never hurried and never had to. 2 men came in behind him and positioned themselves near the door without being told. None of the 3 of them looked at anything but what they chose to look at. He chose, after one sweep of the room, to look at the refreshments table. Amara was standing next to the refreshments table. She watched him cross the room, watched the other parents recalibrate their conversations to face slightly away from his path, watched the space around him stay consistently clear without anyone visibly stepping back. He arrived at the table and picked up a cup of barley tea and drank it like a man who was doing the assembly a favor by being present. "Mr. Kim," she said. He looked at her. His eyes were dark and very still and gave nothing away. "Teacher Diallo," he said. His English was precise, with the faint texture of someone who had learned it as a tool rather than a pleasure. "I'm glad you came. Jae-min talks about you every day." Something moved across his face, so quickly she almost missed it. Something that was not quite pride and not quite pain, but lived in the same neighborhood as both. "What does he say?" he asked. She had expected deflection. "He says you always say goodnight before he goes to sleep. He says you know the names of all his classmates even though you've never met them. He says you make your own coffee every morning because you don't like how anyone else makes it." He was quiet for a moment. "He told you all of that." "Children tell you everything," she said. "You just have to listen at the right angle." He looked at her for 2 seconds longer than necessary. Then he set down his cup and moved to take a seat, and the assembly began, and he did not look at her again for the rest of the evening. But when he left, 40 minutes later, before the Q&A had properly concluded, she caught Mr. Shin The household security man, watching her with an expression that was not quite evaluative and not quite curious, but was definitely neither neutral nor accidental. She filed that away. She didn't know yet what to do with it. The envelope happened 6 days later, and when Jae-min asked her how people get moms, she had sat with the question for the full count of 5 breaths before answering. Usually, she said carefully, a mom is someone who loves you from the very beginning, before you were born. He absorbed this. What if yours left before the beginning one was finished? Amara went very still. She had read nothing in the file about the mother. There was no record of divorce, no listed reason for absence, no documentation of any kind. Just the blank line and not listed, and the silence that lived in it. Then, she said, you find people who love you in other ways. Jae-min looked at the envelope. I was going to find someone like that, but they should probably be paid, so they stay. She looked at this boy, this small, precocious, heartbreaking boy, and she understood, in a way she hadn't before, what the envelope was actually saying. It wasn't a transaction. It was an insurance policy. He wasn't trying to buy love. He was trying to guarantee it. He was 6 years old, and he had already learned that love could leave, and so he was trying to build a contract around it, trying to make it binding, trying to make it stay with the only currency he had. She picked up the envelope, took out the 2 marbles, set one in each of his palms. Keep these, she said. They're worth a lot more than they look. He closed his fingers around them, looked up at her. Will you think about it? She should have said no clearly. She should have redirected. She should have followed the protocol for this kind of conversation, which she had followed many times before. Because children attached to teachers all the time, and the appropriate response was warmth with boundaries, engagement without entanglement. Instead, she heard herself say, I'll think about it, which was, as it turned out, the most consequential sentence she had ever spoken. The thinking lasted 4 days. She thought about it on the subway home, standing in the packed evening rush, with her bag on her lap, watching Seoul stream past the windows in its specific nighttime light. Neon and apartment blocks, and the particular gold of street food stalls. She thought about it in her small apartment in Mapogu, which she had made careful and warm and entirely her own, with fabric from a market near Namdaemun and photographs of her mother and her sister and the coastline at Cape Coast. She thought about it in the classroom, watching Jae-min draw, and she thought about it in the staff room. And she thought about it at 7 in the morning when sleep wouldn't come. And the city outside her window was just beginning to remember itself. She thought, he is not your responsibility. She thought, this is a child, not a project. She thought, his father is a man who enters rooms and changes the air, and you know enough about powerful men to know that proximity to them is never neutral, she thought. The envelope had 47,001 and 2 marbles, she thought. He traded a sticker for one of those marbles, and then traded it back because he changed his mind. On the 5th day, Jae-min didn't come to school. She noticed at morning registration. His chair was empty, his name unchecked, and a brief administrative note said simply, absent, illness. She read it twice. She went through the morning's activities with her full attention on 25 children, and a portion of her mind somewhere else entirely. At lunch, she pulled his file and looked at the address listed under household information. She stared at it for a while. She thought about the protocol. She thought about the envelope. She left school at 3:30, went home to change. And by 4:15, she was in a taxi, moving toward an address in Hanamdong that turned out to be a building so quiet and so expensive that it was essentially invisible to the surrounding city. She told herself she was doing a home visit, which teachers did. She told herself it was professional. She told herself both of these things with the knowledge that she was only partially lying. "Mr. Shin answered the door. He looked at her with an expression that said he'd had been told about her, which told her that Daewon had mentioned her to his staff, which told her she had been seen more clearly than she'd realized at that assembly. "Teacher Diallo," Mr. Shin said. "Jae-min will be glad." He led her through a penthouse apartment that was enormous and expensive and almost completely impersonal. The furniture was beautiful and arranged precisely, and had the quality of things selected by someone who understood value, but not comfort. The walls were bare except for one large painting. Abstract, black and deep blue, very good, and the kitchen gleamed with the blankness of a room rarely cooked in. And then she heard it, faint, from down a hallway. A child's cough. She followed it without being asked. Jae-min's room was the only room in the apartment that looked lived in. The walls were covered in drawings, some framed, most taped. And there were books arranged in a complex system she couldn't immediately decode, and a collection of small dinosaurs along the windowsill, organized by period and not by size, which told her everything about how his mind worked. He was in bed under a blue duvet, slightly flushed, watching the door with the careful patience of someone who had learned that waiting was simply part of the structure of things. When he saw her, his whole face changed. Not surprise. Something quieter than surprise. Something that looked, she thought, like relief. "You came," he said. "You didn't come to school," she said. "I wanted to check on you." He held up 2 fingers. "My throat hurts this many points." "Out of 10? He considered this seriously. "Out of 4. She pulled a chair from his desk to the side of the bed and sat down. She had brought soup. She had stopped at a place near the subway that made the kind of her mother used to call the honest kind, clear broth, nothing too aggressive. And she set it on the nightstand and told him it needed to cool. She stayed because he asked her to read to him. She stayed because when she finished the first book he said, "Please in the way, children say please when they have been taught to be polite, but not taught to be comfortable asking for things." And there was a difference, and she felt it acutely. She stayed because fixing his blanket the first time led to him pulling it off again, not from restlessness, but from wanting the gesture repeated. And she understood this the way she understood children, which was fluently and without condescension. She fixed it 16 times. She did not count. She counted later, from memory, in her apartment, and the number sat with her for a while. She didn't notice Daewon in the doorway until the 14th time. She had no idea how long he had been there. He was leaning against the doorframe with his jacket off and his sleeves pushed up, and an expression on his face that he wasn't managing. She saw it clearly. The unguarded quality of it. The way he was looking not at her but at his son, at the shape his son made under the blue duvet, at the way his son's hand had found her wrist somewhere around the 12th blanket replacement and stayed there. He looked like a man watching something he had forgotten was possible. She held his gaze for exactly 1 second. He pulled himself back together in less than that. The shutters came down, and the stillness returned, and he was once again the man from the assembly, controlled and impenetrable and correctly suited. But she had seen what was underneath, and it was not what she'd expected. It was grief, old and managed but not gone. She looked away first. Jae-min had fallen asleep. She found Daewon in the kitchen when she emerged from the hallway. He was standing with a glass of water and looking out at the city, which from this height was spread out in full darkness and light like a circuit board that had learned to breathe. "He ate the soup," she said. "I saw." She collected her bag. "He'll be fine by morning. His fever is low. Make sure he has water through the night." "Teacher Diallo," she stopped. He turned from the window. He was holding the glass with both hands and looking at her with an expression that was careful in a way that told her The carefulness was work. "I want to make a proposal," he said. She waited. "Jae-min needs consistency," he said. "He needs someone who is present in a way that I am currently not able to provide. I'm not asking for anything beyond what would be professionally appropriate. A structured arrangement. You would come several evenings per week. Enrichment activities. Tutoring if you prefer that framing. The compensation would be substantial." He named a figure. She kept her expression still. The figure was, in fact, substantially more than her monthly salary per week. "Mr. Kim, I know what you're going to say," he said. "You're going to say it's irregular. You're going to say there are professional boundaries. You're going to say that you don't want to complicate his school experience." He paused. None of those are wrong, but he already trusts you, and trust is not a thing I can purchase, Teacher Diallo, which means it is the most expensive thing in my life. She stood there for a moment, with all her very good reasons for saying no. And then, from down the hallway, Jae-min's voice, sleepy, not quite awake. "Appa, is she still here?" Daewon looked at her. A door opened, small feet on the floor. And then Jae-min appeared at the end of the hallway in his pajamas. Dark blue with cartoon sharks, which she noted because she would remember it forever. Rubbing his eye with one fist and holding a marble in the other. He looked between them. "She already said she'd think about it," he said, with perfect certainty. "That means yes." The silence that followed lasted 3 seconds. Then Amara said, 2 evenings per week. Daewon said, 3. She said, 2 with flexibility when needed. He looked at her for a moment. Agreed. Jae-min padded back to his room, without further comment, entirely satisfied, as though 2 adults had simply confirmed what he had already known. She started the following Tuesday. The routine established itself the way routines do when there is a child involved. Not through planning, but through repetition. Through Jae-min's absolute confidence that Tuesday and Thursday were now permanently altered. Through his encyclopedic awareness of her schedule. He knew what time she arrived. He was always at the window when her taxi pulled up, and she always looked up at the right moment. And it became a thing. The wave from 4 floors up, the wave from street level, the small ceremony of arrival. She brought structure, and he responded to it the way children respond to structure when it comes attached to warmth, fully. With relief, with the particular ease of a child who had been waiting for someone to build the scaffolding he instinctively knew he needed. They read together. They cooked simple things. She taught him how to make her mother's simple version of jollof rice, then spent 40 minutes explaining that yes, there was a debate about which country made it best. And no, she would not be resolving it today. They drew, they talked. They sat in comfortable silence, which is a thing very few people know how to do with a 6-year-old. And Amara knew how. She brought a small plant for his windowsill, a succulent, because they were hard to kill, and she wanted him to have a thing he was responsible for keeping alive. He named it, Mr. President. She did not ask why. He watered it every morning with a seriousness that she found quietly extraordinary. She brought a photograph of her mother and put it on his bookshelf between the Cretaceous dinosaurs and the early Jurassic ones, and when he asked who that was, she said, "My mum. She lives in Accra." He studied the photograph for a long time. "She looks like someone who smells good," he said. "She does," Amara said. "Like shea butter and wood smoke." He nodded, as though this confirmed something he'd suspected. She started leaving things. Not deliberately at first. A book, a small packet of the cough drops he'd needed during his illness, a spare phone charger on the kitchen counter. Small things that said, "I was here. I'll be here again," the apartment responded. Someone, she suspected Mr. Shin, who was quietly attentive and apparently capable of subtlety, began stocking the kitchen with the ingredients she used most. The blank walls in the hallway developed one new thing. A drawing Jae-min had made at school, framed and hung at the precise height, where a 6-year-old would be most likely to see it. She noticed Dae-won watching the drawing one evening when she arrived. He had his hands in his pockets, and he was looking at it the way adults look at things made by their children when they think no one is watching, with a complicated softness that they don't know what to do with. She said nothing. She put her bag down and went to find Jae-min. Dae-won began engineering reasons to be present. She noticed it around the 3rd week, a meeting that ran long, so he arrived home during her hours. An instruction to Mr. Shin about dinner being ready for 3, stated neutrally, without looking at her. A phone call he took in the kitchen, standing near the counter where she was cutting fruit, though there was an entire office wing of the apartment where he could have taken it privately. He didn't talk much. He asked questions occasionally, directed at Jae-min, but angled in a way that caught her answers. He listened when Jae-min explained things to her. The hierarchy of dinosaurs, the specific injustice of bedtime, the ongoing situation with a classmate named Junho who kept drawing over the edges of the communal art paper. Dae-won listened to all of this the way a man listens, when he is rationing what he lets himself feel, careful and controlled, and specifically positioned, so that his face was not the thing most visible in the room. She found him in the kitchen at 10:31 Thursday night. She had stayed later than usual because Jae-min had asked her to finish a chapter they'd started and then fallen asleep before the chapter ended, and she had finished it quietly anyway and sat with him for a few minutes after, listening to him breathe, feeling something that she refused to name, though it was warm and steady and had been growing since the envelope. Dae-won was at the counter with a single glass of something amber and a folder of documents he was not reading. "You stayed late," he said. He wanted the chapter finished. He was asleep. "I know." Dae-won looked at the glass, set it down, looked at her. "Why do you do that?" "Finish the chapter?" "Care," he said, "about him, beyond what you're paid to do." She considered this. It was a blunter question than she'd expected from him. And it told her something, that he was tired tonight, that the controls were slightly relaxed, that this was a different quality of presence than the one he usually maintained in her company. "Because he's a person," she said, "not a job." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "His mother found it very easy to leave. I want him to understand that not everyone does." She went still. He seemed to hear what he'd said. The shutters came back. But he didn't take it back, which told her more than the sentence itself. "Good night, Teacher Diallo," he said. She picked up the bag. "Good night, Mr. Kim." She was in the elevator before she exhaled. It was a Tuesday in November when she discovered the full scope of what he was. She had known in the abstract. The kind of knowing you do when information is available, and you have chosen not to look directly at it. The men at the door, the way rooms rearranged themselves around him. The blankness of his professional information on Jae-min's school file. She had assembled the shape of it without requiring the details, because the details would have required a decision, and she had not been ready to make it. The decision was made for her on a Tuesday in November by a man named Oh, who came to the apartment while she was there, and stood in the living room and argued in Korean with a velocity and heat that had no business being in a home where a child was 40 feet away doing a spelling worksheet. She had closed Jae-min's door, gone to the kitchen, and listened, not because she was eavesdropping, but because the walls in this apartment, for all their cost, were not built for arguments of this kind. She caught words she knew: territory, payment, name. She caught the tone she didn't need translated: threat. And she caught the specific quality of Dae-won's responses. Low, even, unhurried. the voice of a man who was not afraid of the person threatening him, because the distance between them, in terms of actual power, was so vast that fear was simply not the appropriate response. The man named O left in 11 minutes. The door closed, then there was silence. She found Daewon in the hallway. He saw her face, and he knew what it said. "How much did you hear?" he asked. "Enough." "And?" She looked at him for a long moment. "And you should probably apologize to Jae-min for the noise." He stared at her. "He closed his worksheet," she said. "He was trying to concentrate. He finds loud noises disruptive." Daewon crossed the hallway, knocked once on Jae-min's door, went inside. She heard his voice, low and careful. She heard Jae-min's voice, asking something. She heard the low voice again. He came back out 3 minutes later. Something in his posture had changed. Not relaxed exactly, but redistributed. "He's fine," he said. "I know," she said. "He's resilient. It would be better if he didn't have to be." She should have gone home that night, feeling the gravity of what she'd learned. The structure of his world, the nature of his business, the thing that explained the men at the door, and the empty file, and the rooms rearranging themselves. She should have felt the logic of departure, the clean arithmetic of, "This is not your world, this is not your risk. You have a life and a contract and a sister in Accra, who calls every Sunday, and a mother who smells like shea butter and wood smoke, and none of them are in Seoul, and none of them need to be in danger." She went home. She sat in her apartment. She looked at her hands. She thought about the blue duvet, the 16 blanket replacements, the marble in Jae-min's fist. She thought, "You should run." And then she thought more quietly, more honestly, "You're not going to." The realization arrived without drama. No swell of music, no cinematic revelation. Just the fact of it, sitting there in her kitchen at 11:30 at night, ordinary and enormous and perfectly clear. She was not going to run, because the boy in that apartment had put 2 marbles and 47,001 in an envelope and called it enough. And she had decided, without quite deciding, the way you decide things that are actually just truth you're finally admitting, that it was enough, that he was enough, that whatever this was, she was already in it. And then she thought about the man who had watched from the doorway while she fixed the blanket. And she told herself that was a separate thing, and she half believed herself. The warning came on a Wednesday, delivered without ceremony. She was leaving the building just after 8 in the evening, and there was a car parked wrong, too still, too precisely placed, and a man leaning against it who was not Mr. Shin and was not anyone she recognized, and who looked at her with an expression that was not aggression and not friendliness, and was precisely, deliberately, a message. "Teacher," he said, in English. His English was for her benefit, which meant he'd been briefed. Long way from home. She stopped walking. She did not look away from him. "The boss values stability," the man said. "His arrangement with you is noticeable. Noticeable things make people ask questions." He paused. "Simpler if the arrangement ends." She looked at him for 3 full seconds. "Good evening," she said, and kept walking. She got into a taxi. She gave her address. She kept her hands folded in her lap and her face toward the window, and she breathed steadily all the way home. And it was only when she was inside her apartment with the door locked that she allowed herself to sit down on the floor with her back against the couch and close her eyes and shake, just for a few minutes, before she stopped. She did not call Daewon. She should have. She knew what it meant, that someone was watching, that she had been identified, that proximity to him had made her visible to people who used visibility as a lever. She knew the intelligent thing, the rational thing, was to call him and tell him and let him make the calculation that he was better equipped to make. Instead, she called her sister. "Amara," Efua said immediately. The way you say someone's name when you've been slightly worried about them for months. What happened? Nothing. I'm fine. You're calling me at midnight my time on a Wednesday. What happened? She told her. Not everything, enough. Ifua was quiet through most of it, which was unusual. Ifua's natural register was immediate and expressive and opinionated. And the quiet told Amara that her sister understood this was serious in a way that required listening before responding. Are you in love with him? Ifua asked when she'd finished. I didn't say anything about Amara. She was quiet for a moment. I don't know what I am. You called me at midnight, Ifua said, not to ask for advice. To say something out loud that you haven't said yet, so say it. She pressed her hand to her sternum, felt her own heartbeat. I don't want to leave, she said, and I know I should, and I know all the reasons. And I've been through every single one of them tonight, and I still don't want to leave. And that terrifies me more than the man by the car. Ifua exhaled. Okay. You've never been a person who ran from the right thing because it was complicated. You've run from wrong things dressed up as safe ones. That's different. This could get me hurt. So could the other thing, Ifua said, and it almost did. She sat with that. Her sister had never been wrong about her. It was one of the most useful and most uncomfortable facts of her life. Go to sleep, Ifua said, and tomorrow stop pretending you're only there for the boy. She did not go to sleep for a long time after that. Day one shut her out 4 days later. She arrived on Tuesday to find Mr. Shin at the door, not holding it open in his usual way, but standing in front of it, which was a different posture entirely. Teacher Diallo, he said. He looked unhappy about what he was about to say. Mr. Kim has asked me to inform you that the arrangement has been suspended indefinitely. She looked at him. Suspended. He asks that you understand it is for practical reasons, he says. Mr. Shin paused, and it was the pause of a man reading from instructions he does not agree with. He says you are released from any further obligation. Released. She stood on the threshold of the building and felt the word land. Jae-min, she said, how is he? He's asking for you, Mr. Shin said quietly. And then lower, and not as a message from his employer, he's not eating. She closed her eyes for 1 second, opened them. Thank you, Mr. Shin, she said. She left. She did not go home. She walked to the small park near the Han River that she had found in her first month in Seoul, the one that was somehow always half empty, even when the rest of the city was not. And she sat on a bench and looked at the water and tried to think. He had done it to protect her. She knew this with the certainty of someone who had watched him carefully for 2 months. The man by the car had been a warning, and day one had received his own version of it. Not the same warning, because people like him were not warned with Carlinas and English pleasantries, but something with more weight and more precision, and his response had been to remove the thing that made him vulnerable, to remove her, which meant she was the thing that made him vulnerable. She sat with that for a long time. She thought about leaving. She let herself think about it fully, not as an abstract option but as a real one. Packing the apartment, requesting an early termination of her contract, a flight to Accra, her mother's house, her sister's voice from the other room, the coastline, the life she had been building before the chapter that sent her away. She could rebuild it. She was capable of that. She had done it before. She thought about Jae-min not eating. She thought about the man from the doorway, the grief underneath the control, old and managed and never resolved. And the way he'd looked at the drawing in the hallway, and the way he had said, "Trust is not a thing I can purchase," and the way he had sat in his kitchen at 10:30 with a folder of documents he was not reading. She thought about the envelope and noun 47,002 marbles. She thought, he's not one of your men. You don't get to dismiss me. She stood up, went back to the building, pressed the intercom button. Silence. She pressed it again. "Mr. Shin," she said to the intercom, knowing he was listening, "I know you can hear me. I brought Jeon." The kind Jae-min said he'd never tried. "Please tell him that if he doesn't eat something in the next 20 minutes, I will be eating his portion, and that is a genuine threat." Silence. Then, Mr. Shin's voice, barely suppressed. "One moment, Teacher Diallo." The gate opened. Jae-min met her in the hallway. He had clearly run from his room, and then made himself slow down at the last possible second, arriving at walking pace with the studied casualness of a 6-year-old, trying to not look desperate. And it was the most transparent performance she had ever witnessed, and she loved him completely for it. "I wasn't waiting," he said. "I know," she said. "I wasn't hungry either. I know that too. But the Jeon, that's different. Obviously." He took her hand, led her to the kitchen, sat on the counter while she reheated the Jeon on the stove, which he was technically not allowed to do, and which she would mention approximately never. Daewon appeared in the kitchen doorway 20 minutes later. She did not look at him immediately. She finished what she was doing, set the plate in front of Jae-min, watched him eat 2 pieces before turning. He was in the doorway with his hands at his sides and his jaw set, and an expression on his face that was trying very hard to be the assembly expression. Controlled, impenetrable, and failing, specifically in the eyes, which were not controlled at all. "You came back," he said. "Yes. I told Mr. Shin. I know what you told Mr. Shin. It isn't safe, Mr. Kim." She kept her voice level. "I'm not one of your men. You don't get to dismiss me." Silence. Jae-min ate his jeon with the focused attention of a child who is absolutely listening to every word. "The people I deal with," Daewon said, very quietly, "do not negotiate. They don't warn twice." "Then we'll have to be smarter than them," she said. "This is not your fight." "You made it mine," she said, "the moment you let me in this door, the moment you agreed to the arrangement, the moment you watched from the doorway and didn't say anything and stayed anyway." She paused. "You don't get to make me part of this, and then protect me from it by leaving me out of it. That's not protection. That's control." The silence after that was long enough for Jae-min to eat a 3rd piece of jeon. Daewon looked at her. Through the remains of the assembly expression, through all the managed control and the impenetrable stillness, she could see it. The same thing she'd seen in the doorway, when he'd been holding his son's sleeping face in his eyes and not knowing what to do with the softness it required. "You are the most stubborn person I have ever met," he said, and it was not entirely a complaint. "I'm from Accra," she said. "We don't leave things unfinished." Jae-min looked up from his jeon. "She's my people," he said, to no one in particular, and went back to eating. What followed was the most dangerous 2 weeks of her life, and she experienced them with a clarity that she would later describe to Efua as the feeling of being fully awake for the first time in a year. The rival faction. She learned their name only in pieces, assembled from fragments of conversation she was not meant to hear, and chose not to pretend she hadn't. Was called the Seojin Group, and they had been patient and lateral in their approach to Daewon, and the thing they had identified was not a weakness in his business or his structure or his reach, but in the new variable his household had recently produced: a woman, a foreign woman. A woman who arrived by taxi twice a week and stayed for hours, and whose presence had made Kim Daewon sit in a kitchen at 10:30 at night not reading documents. They were not wrong about what they'd seen. That was the problem. Daewon brought it to her directly, which she had not expected. He came to the school, not inside, but to the cafe across the street. At the time he knew her lunch break fell, and he was there when she came out of the building, and he sat across from her with 2 cups of coffee and told her, concisely, and without attempting to soften it, what the situation was. "They want me destabilized," he said. They have assessed that the fastest route to that is through you. Or Jae-min, she said. His jaw tightened. Jae-min has security that has not been changed in 3 years and will not be changed. He is protected. And me? You were not supposed to need protection, he said. That was my failure. She looked at the coffee cup. What are you asking me? He was quiet for a moment. I'm not asking you to leave, he said. And then, with the specific difficulty of a man who had spent 5 years teaching himself that need was a liability. I'm asking you to trust me to fix this. What does fixing this look like? Bringing the situation to a conclusion, he said, removing the leverage. How long? Days, not weeks. She studied his face. He was not performing calm. He was actually calm, in the specific way of a man who had done this before and knew his capacity for it, and also knew the cost of it, and was choosing to pay it. He was also afraid, and she could see it in the way he was holding his coffee cup. And she did not think he knew she could see it. While you do that, she said, I'm still coming on Tuesday and Thursday. Amara, it was the first time he had used her name. The air between them reorganized around it. He seemed to realize what he'd done. He did not take it back. Jae-min needs the routine, she said more quietly. Disruption right now will tell him something is wrong. He already notices everything. Don't take away the routine. He looked at her. The control was completely gone from his face, and what was there instead was something she had no category for. Something that was not vulnerability, but was adjacent to it. That was not asking, but was close. That was the expression of a man, standing at the edge of a thing he had convinced himself did not exist, and finding that it not only existed, but had been growing in his kitchen at 10:30 at night for weeks. Okay, he said. She picked up her coffee, and day one he looked at her. The name, she said, you can use it. She went back to school. She taught the afternoon's activities. She fixed the collars of 2 children who hadn't noticed theirs were crooked. She helped Jae-min, when he arrived at pickup, carry the drawing he'd made. Large, on the biggest sheet of paper available, that depicted, with the confident inaccuracy of a 6-year-old's rendering, 3 people standing in a kitchen next to what was apparently a stove, all holding hands. Who's who? She asked him in the taxi. He pointed. Apa me, you. Why are we all the same height? He considered this. Because you're all my people. My people are all the same size. She looked out the window. Seoul moved past in the late afternoon light. She thought about what Efa had said. You've never run from the right thing because it was complicated. And she thought about the drawing in the kitchen, 3 same-sized figures holding hands, and she thought, yes, this is the right thing. The crisis came on a Thursday. She was there. She was always there on Thursdays, which was the point. And she was with Jae-min in his room at the desk, and he was reading to her, which they'd recently switched to, because his reading level had surpassed what she'd expected. And she had decided to let him lead the sessions, and he was reading with the focused pleasure of a child who has discovered that being good at a thing feels different when someone is genuinely listening. She heard the door. She heard voices, more of them than usual, at a faster register. She heard Mr. Shin's voice, very close, saying something sharp and brief. She put her hand on the book. Jae-min? I heard it, he said. He was very calm. The calmness of a child who had learned from his environment that external noise was something to be observed, not panicked by. It looked like composure. She knew it was something more like resignation, and this made her chest hurt in a specific way. Stay here, she said. You're not supposed to go out there, he said. I know. She stood up. Lock this door behind me. Teacher Amara. She looked at him. He held her gaze for a moment, and then something in him, 6 years old, more perceptive than anyone had prepared for, seemed to make a decision. Okay, he said, but come back. I'm going to come back. She went into the hallway. The situation resolved before she reached it. She understood this afterward, in the debrief that Daewon gave her with a precision that told her he had rehearsed it for calm delivery, though the delivery could not entirely contain the edges. 3 men from the Seojin group had pushed past the lobby security, had made it to the floor, had found 3 of Daewon's people already there, had made a calculation and retreated. Daewon had been in the apartment for the last 40 minutes. She had not known this in his office wing, and he had been managing the conclusion of the situation in real time. It was over before she reached the hallway. She stood there for 30 seconds, hearing voices resolve from sharp to level. And then she went back to Jae-min's room. And he was not there. His window was open, not open. He'd been in the room for years and never touched the window latches. It was open because he had opened it, and below his window was the building's external maintenance ledge, 2 feet wide, and she looked at it, and her heart stopped for 1 full second before she realized the ledge was empty. She turned. She went back into the hallway. She called his name, twice controlled, no edge of panic in it because she would not give him panic to absorb. She found him. He had gone through the apartment, through the living room, to the front hallway, and he was standing in his socks outside the door of his father's office. He had not knocked. He was just standing there, holding 1 marble, a single one, the one she'd given back, the one he always kept, and waiting. She heard Daewon's voice through the door, the sharp, controlled register, a language she was still learning, but in which she could now read the emotional weather with some accuracy. And then she heard it. A pause in the register. A change. He had heard his son outside the door. The door opened. Daewon looked down and saw Jae-min. Something crossed his face that was different from everything she had seen from him before. It was not managed, was not performative, was not even particularly composed. It was just a man, looking at his son, outside his office door in the middle of an ongoing crisis, holding a marble like it was something that could protect him. Daewon crouched down to his level. "Hey," he said. "I heard you," Jae-min said. "From my room, I didn't want to be far." Daewon looked at his son for a long moment. Then he put a hand on the back of Jae-min's head, the gentlest gesture, utterly unaffected. And he pulled him in and held him there, forehead to forehead, the way she had seen fathers do in movies and almost never in real life. And he closed his eyes for exactly 5 seconds. She watched from the end of the hallway, and that was the moment she understood. Not intellectually, not logically, but in the way you understand things that live below reason. That she was not going to be okay, not in the way she'd planned, not in the way she'd been managing. She was not going to be able to maintain the clean line between what this was and what it was becoming. Because what it was becoming had been happening for weeks, since the doorway, since the coffee, since his name in her mouth at a cafe table across from the school. She had stopped running from the right thing. Daewon looked up and saw her, still crouched at his son's level, still holding the back of his son's head, completely exposed, completely without his armor, in the specific way of a man who had been caught at the moment he forgot to put it on. She didn't look away. Neither did he. Jae-min pulled back, looked at his father's face, then turned and looked at her. He had, at 6 years old, the alarming ability to read a room with the accuracy of someone with decades more experience. He seemed to conclude something. "Okay," he said, as though summarizing a meeting. "Good," and walked back to his room. The crisis concluded over the following 48 hours, in ways that she was told about in outline and did not need in detail. The Seojin faction overreached. She gathered this from context, from the quality of Daewon's voice when he called to tell her it was resolved, from the specific satisfaction of Mr. Shin's posture the next time she saw him. The leverage they'd tried to use had been neutralized. The threat had collapsed under its own weight. She found out about the specific thing that neutralized it 2 weeks later, and she found it out from Jae-min. Appa called Uncle Park. Jae-min said at the desk during what was technically a reading session. Uncle Park is very powerful. Appa doesn't like asking him for things. Why not? Because Appa doesn't like owing people. He turned a page, but he said. Jae-min paused, with the precision of someone quoting from memory. He said some things are worth owing for. She looked at the book in front of him. Did your dad tell you that? He was on the phone, Jae-min said. I was supposed to be asleep. Ah, I wasn't asleep, I can see that. He turned another page. He was talking about you, he added, casually, in the manner of someone dropping something significant from a great height without appearing to notice. She stared at the page. Keep reading, she said. He kept reading. The conversation with Dae-won happened on a Friday evening a week after the crisis. She had come for no scheduled reason. She had texted Mr. Shin, who had said come, and she had come. Jae-min was asleep. She had checked on him, fixed his blanket out of habit, been relieved when she remembered there was no longer anything to fix his blanket against. Dae-won was in the kitchen. Not with documents. Not with a glass of something amber. Just standing by the window, looking at the city, with his hands in his pockets and his jacket off. And he turned when she came in, and looked at her across the kitchen, and did not say anything for a moment. I wanted to thank you, he said, for coming back when I told you not to. You didn't tell me not to, you told me to leave. That's different. Semantics. No, she said. It's the difference between a boundary and a dismissal. He looked at her. You always do that. Do what? Name things precisely. The exact thing I said versus the thing I meant, versus the thing I should have said. He paused. It's disorienting. You're welcome, she said. He almost smiled. She had seen him get close before, some fractional movement around his eyes, some brief and controlled relaxation of the lines of his face. But this was the closest. It looked like something that was learning to exist again after a long time of believing it couldn't. Amara, he said. Yes. I don't want you to come back as the arrangement. She waited. I don't want you to come on Tuesdays and Thursdays because it's a structured professional agreement. He said this the way he said everything significant. Directly, without ornament, as though managing the emotion out of the words was the only way to make them speakable. I want you to come because you want to be here. And if I said I already was... The silence after that was a different kind of silence than any she'd experienced in this kitchen. Not the silence of something unsaid, the silence of something finally said, settling into a space that had been waiting for it. Then I want you to stay, he said. Not as an employee, not as an arrangement. He looked at her steadily, and the effort of it was visible. The specific effort of someone extending toward a thing they have been afraid of for a long time. Just stay. She looked back at him. She thought about the envelope, the marbles, the drawing of 3 same-sized figures. Mr. President the Succulent on the windowsill. The chapter she'd finished after Jae-min fell asleep. The coffee at the cafe across from the school. The sound of his name in her mouth. She thought about what Ifua had said the night she'd called at midnight. You've never been a person who ran from the right thing because it was complicated. Okay, she said. That was not the entire conversation. There were more words. Practical ones, careful ones. Words that acknowledged what his world was, and what hers had been, and what the intersection of them would require. There were things said about Jae-min, and things said about Seoul. And one thing said about her contract that she filed away to revisit. There was a moment when he crossed the kitchen, not entirely, not to her side of it, but enough, and looked at her in a way that was not managed at all, and she held it. And neither of them moved, and The city outside the window held its breath. And then Jae-min's voice from down the hallway, 4 words, delivered with the confidence of a child who has been listening. "I'm awake now." Just saying. Dae-won closed his eyes briefly. She covered her mouth with her hand. He called down the hallway, "Go to sleep, Jae-min." I was asleep. I just woke up naturally. It is 11 o'clock. That's when I naturally wake up sometimes. She was shaking with suppressed laughter. She could see from Dae-won's face that he was fighting the same thing and losing in exactly the same way. "Good night, Jae-min," she called. A pause. "Okay," Jae-min said. "Good night." And then, very carefully, testing the word Amara. She pressed her hand harder against her mouth. It was the first time he had used her name without the title. He had saved it. She understood this, and he had deployed it with 6-year-old precision, at the exact moment it would have the most possible weight. She heard his door close. She looked at Dae-won. He was looking back at her with an expression that was completely open. No management, no control, no performance. Just the face of a man who was, she realized, deeply and quietly happy in a way he had apparently forgotten was an option. 3 weeks later, she was sitting on the floor of Jae-min's room, and they were building something with blocks. An ambitious construction that Jae-min was calling a palace apartment, which he had explained was a building that was both fancy and comfortable, and the distinction mattered to him. When Jae-min stopped mid-block and looked at her, "So," he said. "So," she said. He considered the palace apartment, added another block. "You're staying. I'm staying, not as my teacher. I'm still your teacher at school, but here," he said. "Here you're staying differently." She looked at him. "Yes, here I'm staying differently." He picked up 2 more blocks, placed them carefully. He had, she noticed, put the largest block at the center of the structure. Not at the top, not at the bottom, but exactly in the middle, where it held everything else up. "So you're my mum now?" he said. The question was delivered with complete seriousness. No tremor in it, no performance, no test. He said it the way he said things he had already decided were true and was simply waiting for the world to confirm. She heard footsteps in the hallway. Dae-won appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame, jacket off, the specific relaxation of a man who had been home for hours rather than arriving, and looked at the scene in front of him. The palace apartment, the blocks, his son asking the question that he had been asking in various forms since ton 47,002 marbles. He looked at Amara. She looked back at him. "If she wants to be," Dae-won said. Jae-min turned to her, patient, certain, holding a block in each hand. She looked at this child, this extraordinary, perceptive, achingly tender child, who had counted his savings and found 2 marbles and decided that love was worth paying for, because the alternative was assuming it would stay for free, and he had learned too young that it didn't. She looked at him and she felt something resolve in her chest. Not the dramatic resolution of a wound closing, but the quieter one, the better one. The resolution of finally being in the right place, at the right time, with the right people, after a long time of being adjacent to those things, but not quite inside them. She added a block to the palace apartment. "I want to be," she said. Jae-min looked at the block she'd placed, right next to the large center one, fitted against it, part of the structure now. He seemed to measure this, nod, accept it with the gravity it deserved. "Okay," he said, "good." He added his 2 blocks. The palace apartment held. "The building is stable now," he announced. "I was waiting for the right number of pieces." Dae-won, from the doorway, said nothing. He was looking at his son, then at her, then at his son again, with the expression of a man who had spent 5 years believing that empire was sufficient, and was only now, in this room with these blocks, understanding what sufficient actually meant. She looked up at him. He looked back at her. and the last wall came down without a sound. She called Ifua that night, late, from her apartment. She had not stayed over yet. That was a conversation for another day, or rather a decision that would make itself the same way other decisions had made themselves, gradually and inevitably. And Ifua answered on the second ring. "I know," Ifua said, before Amara could speak. "You don't know yet. You sound like yourself again," her sister said. "Not soul yourself or post-quame yourself. You, your actual self. The one who used to call me and talk about nothing for an hour, because she was too happy to need a reason." A pause. "So I know." Amara leaned against her windowsill and looked at the city, Mapogu in its nighttime particulars. The streetlights and the apartment windows, and somewhere in Hanam-dong, a building where a 6-year-old was sleeping with a marble in his fist, and a succulent named Mr. President on his windowsill, and a man who made his own coffee was sitting in his kitchen with documents he might actually be reading. "He asked me to stay," she said. "Good. His son called me his mom." Ifua made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something more tearful than that. "Amara, I know. What did you say?" She smiled at the city. "I added a block to the palace apartment." "What does that mean?" "It means yes," she said. "It means yes in the language of a 6-year-old, which is the most honest language there is." She paused. He was right, by the way, about the marbles. "What about them?" "He said they were worth more than they looked." She pressed her hand to the glass. He was right. She stayed on the phone with her sister for another hour, talking about nothing and everything, her voice carrying the particular quality that Ifua had recognized from the first ring, the quality of a person who has stopped running, who has arrived somewhere, who is still and warm and no longer bracing for the next departure. Outside, Seoul continued to exist in its specific, magnificent, circuit board way. Inside the apartment, she was already home. She just hadn't moved the last of her things yet. She would. The photograph of her mother was already on a bookshelf in Hanam-dong, between the Cretaceous and the Jurassic dinosaurs, where a boy with extraordinary instincts had identified it and said, "She looks like someone who smells good." She put her hand over the glass for a moment. Then she went to bed. And in the morning, Tuesday, she took a taxi to a penthouse in Hanam-dong where a window 4 floors up was already occupied by a small figure in dark blue pajamas with cartoon sharks, waiting with the certainty of a child who has never doubted, not once, that she was going to come back. She looked up at the right moment. She waved. He waved back. The ceremony of arrival conducted in full. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you, truly. If it moved you, if you found yourself holding your breath somewhere in the middle of it, if Jae-min made you feel something you weren't expecting, please like this video, leave a comment below, and tell me your favorite moment. And subscribe if you haven't already. There are so many more stories where this one came from, and I don't want you to miss a single one.